Her own son booked her a motel, 3 hours from the family reunion she founded. He called it a mix-up. She called the venue and claimed the whole building. Now he's locked out, pacing the gate. And inside, his mother stands beneath a banner that says, "Hosted by Linda Martin." She offers him nothing, not even blame, because when a son forgets the woman who built the legacy, she doesn't knock. She owns the door. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor. Subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. I didn't ask to be honored, but I didn't expect to be banished either. Linda Martin had just set her mug of tea on the kitchen counter when her laptop pinged with a new email. The subject line was straightforward: "Your room confirmation, Travelers Rest Inn," but something about it made her pause before clicking. She opened the message, expecting perhaps a quaint B&B near the Ashby Heights venue where this year's Martin family reunion was being held. Instead, her eyes narrowed on the address, Route 17 South, a place called Travelers Rest, situated just outside an industrial truck stop, 180 miles away from the reunion grounds. Her throat tightened as she scrolled through the body of the email, trying to process what she was reading. A forwarded message from her son, Brian, sat just above the hotel details. All local rooms were already booked. "Hope this is okay. Can't wait to see you, Mom." She sat down slowly, the woven seat of the kitchen chair creaking beneath her. Her hands remained still on either side of the keyboard, her fingers curled slightly, as if reaching for something they no longer trusted to hold. She hadn't asked for special treatment, hadn't expected a banner or a toast or even a reserved chair near the front. But this wasn't oversight. This was intentional placement. Away, apart. Her fingers moved again, this time tapping a reply. "Is this right?" The message was brief and careful, like walking barefoot over broken glass. Brian's response came quickly, with his trademark breezy efficiency. "Yeah, stuff went fast. We barely got our own. Sorry." Linda didn't type another word. Instead, she opened a new browser tab, her breath shallow and quiet. She navigated to the Ashby Heights Event Center, clicked the Lodging tab, and stared at the list of available rooms. Garden View Loft, available Courtyard Double, available Deluxe Queen, available Suite A, available. The entire block was open. She leaned back in her chair, a faint metallic taste rising in her mouth. Her heart wasn't racing exactly. It was pacing, careful and slow, like it knew something her mind hadn't quite admitted yet. This wasn't a logistical fluke. It was a boundary drawn in silence, an invisible red line that said, "You don't belong at the center anymore." That evening, she met her former colleague Nancy at Walker's Diner for their usual Tuesday dinner, a habit they'd kept since Linda's retirement 2 months earlier. They chose their favorite booth near the window, the one with the cracked vinyl, but the best view of the street. Linda pushed a cucumber slice around her salad plate with her fork, eyes distant. "I got my room confirmation for the reunion," she said after a long stretch of quiet. Nancy raised an eyebrow. "And? It's not in Ashby Heights. It's 3 hours away. Roadside motel, 1 star, no elevator." "Brian booked you that?" Her tone was sharp, almost incredulous. Linda nodded slowly. "Said everything else was full. I checked. It isn't." Nancy exhaled through her nose, tapping a fingernail against the rim of her glass. "You raised him better than that." "I raised a man who thinks I'm a guest," Linda said, her voice steadier now. "Not a root." Neither of them spoke for a while after that. The waitress refilled their water. Someone's baby cried softly in a nearby booth. Outside, dusk was folding over the town like a warm, heavy blanket. By the time Linda returned home, she had already made up her mind. She took off her shoes, padded into the kitchen, and pulled out her yellow legal pad, the one she used for taxes, holiday lists, and plans she didn't want to forget. She drew a single line across the top and wrote in small, deliberate print, "Legacy Weekend." Her hands were steady as she picked up the phone and dialed the Ashby Heights Event Center directly. A young voice answered, friendly but brisk. "Good evening, Ashby Heights Center. This is Kaylee. How can I help you?" "Yes," Linda said, her tone polite but firm. "I'm calling to inquire about hosting a private event. I'd like to know what spaces are available." "Of course. Kaylee replied, fingers clacking lightly against her keyboard. Are you looking for a room or a full event package? I'd like the full event center if it's available. Ballroom, garden terrace, suites, everything. There was a pause on the other end. Linda could hear the hum of fluorescent lighting and soft background chatter. Then Kaylee spoke again. Actually, the full center is still open for private bookings. Linda didn't smile, didn't gasp. She simply nodded to herself as she reached for her pen. Actually, the full center is still open for private bookings. He gave me a number on the highway. I gave myself the building. The phone line clicked softly as the receptionist finalized Linda's payment. A gentle rustle of paperwork followed, like the room itself was folding into place behind her decision. Confirmation number 3942, Kaylee said cheerfully. You're all set for full occupancy of the Ashby Heights Event Center. Ballroom, garden terrace, 12 suites, full-service hospitality team. If you'd like to walk through the space before the weekend, we can— No need, Linda interrupted gently. I've seen it before. Years ago. Her voice carried a calm that almost sounded like nostalgia, but her eyes were razor-sharp as they moved to the legal pad still sitting on her kitchen counter. The words Legacy Weekend were underlined now, twice. She hung up and stared at the quiet house around her. The dishwasher had finished long ago. The hum of the refrigerator was the only sound left. Outside, dusk was spreading across the backyard in wide lavender strokes, casting long shadows through the oak trees that she and her late husband Tom had planted 30 years ago. She picked up her planner and began making calls, silent ones, private ones. She didn't text Brian, didn't forward him anything. There would be no confrontation, no announcement, no grand declaration of retaliation. She simply filled the space he had left open with intention. By the next morning, she had reserved a private catering team from a boutique firm in Cedar Hill. Brunch for 60, linen napkins, custom pastries stamped with M. No first names, no faces, just the family letter, returned to her control. She arranged for framed photographs to be delivered from the attic. One of her and Tom at the very first reunion, paper plates and plastic forks, her arm around Brian's toddler-sized shoulders. One of Brian in his graduation robe, one of his son Ethan holding a sparkler in the backyard at the 4th of July cookout just 3 years earlier. She planned to line the event lobby with them, not out of vanity, but as evidence. They had not come from nowhere. Nancy came over that afternoon, clipboard in hand. You want me to make a spreadsheet or pretend to be a guest coordinator? I want you to make it look effortless, Linda said, handing her a folder. People respect Polish. Nancy flipped through the documents, schedules, room assignments, vendor lists, backup plans, and let out a low whistle. You know, some people would have just skipped the reunion. I'm not some people, Linda replied, tapping the top of her pad with the edge of her pen. And this isn't a reunion, not anymore. It's a restoration. Outside, the day moved like warm honey, slow, dense with heat, heavy with knowing. Linda stood in her sunroom for a moment and stared out at the garden. She hadn't told a soul, not even Nancy, that she had added one more item to the itinerary. A quiet reflection hour held in the garden terrace where her guests would each be given a note card and asked to write a memory they didn't want forgotten. A moment that mattered, something or someone they felt had been pushed to the edge. Across town, on the internet, Brian posted a smiling photo of himself and his wife in front of a pile of coolers. His caption read, "Excited for this weekend, family means everything." His words hit Linda's screen just as she finished a ribbon order for welcome bags. She didn't react. She simply typed another note to the concierge, "Please place family name signs at every suite door. All names provided upon arrival, except for 2. The next morning, her phone buzzed, Brian's name lighting up on the screen. Brian, weird update. Our venue double booked. I'll figure it out. Linda stared at the message for a long moment. Her teacup was still warm in her hands. Outside, the wind stirred the trees as if the world itself had just turned a page. Brian texts, "Weird update. Our venue double booked. I'll figure it out. He didn't invite me in, so I owned the door he planned to walk through." The call came just after Linda finished arranging the last row of frames along her hallway floor. 40 years of family history sat in silence around her. Vacations, cookouts, high school dances, hospital visits, weddings, babies. None of it in chronological order, just like life, she thought. And still, the through line was obvious. She had always been there, not always in the center, but always. Her cell buzzed, the name Ashby Heights office lighting up the screen. She tucked the phone under her chin as she adjusted the photo of her and Tom from 1989. Him wearing a comically oversized sun hat she'd dared him to put on, both of them laughing mid-blur. "This is Linda," she said, brushing dust off the frame. A young man's voice, polite and rushed. "Mrs. Martin, this is Kevin, the venue manager. I just wanted to let you know, someone named Brian Martin called a few minutes ago. He was trying to reconfirm a family reservation for this weekend, but we had to inform him that the space is no longer available." Linda didn't blink. "I see." "He seemed confused," Kevin continued. "Said he'd booked months ago. We explained it's been overridden by a private full-site reservation. We didn't mention your name, of course, per your request." "Thank you," Linda said evenly. "That's all I needed." She ended the call and returned the frame to the lineup, adjusting it half an inch to the right. The laughter in the photos seemed louder now. 10 minutes later, her phone chimed again. Brian this time. "Brian, can you believe this? Venue double booked, total disaster." She stared at the message for a beat, thumb hovering over the screen. Then she typed slowly, each word measured. "Linda. Wow, hope you figure it out. No punctuation, no warmth, just enough space to be read 100 different ways." Outside, the late morning sun hit the front of the house like gold syrup, soft and sticky. Inside, Linda moved with quiet purpose. She opened a large plastic tote marked Fragile Office Closet and pulled out the last set of photos: her classroom farewell party, her retirement luncheon, her first school yearbook. She clipped them one by one into a freestanding gallery frame she had ordered 2 weeks ago, when she still thought she'd be just another face in the group photo. She was nobody's background anymore. By that afternoon, the final guest list had taken shape, hand-picked from her own address book. No form emails, no mass texts. She called or wrote each person individually. Some names were familiar from past years, others hadn't attended in decades, but each one had a history with her, not just with the name Martin. As she worked, Nancy entered through the back door carrying a stack of tote bags, the custom labels already sewn on: Martin Family, established by Linda. Linen blend, deep navy blue, with white script embroidery. Clean. Undeniable. "They turned out better than I thought," Nancy said, setting them down on the dining room table. Linda picked one up, running her fingers across the stitching. "They won't forget who did the work next time." "You planning a next time already?" "I'm planning for people to ask." Nancy opened a folded vinyl banner and held it up across the living room arch. Printed in gold, beneath a soft matte photo of a family oak tree, was Linda's high school yearbook quote, "Let them underestimate you." She hadn't remembered writing it, but now, reading it, she felt the past circling back like an old dog that finally understood what she was worth. That evening, as the sky folded into twilight and the porch lights flickered on across her block, Linda poured herself a half glass of Cabernet and sat beneath the soft hum of the ceiling fan. Her phone lit up again. "Brian. Where are you staying, by the way?" The message felt casual, but something in the wording twisted. It wasn't a question. It was suspicion masked as conversation. A crack forming. She swirled the wine, watching the slow red spiral at the bottom of the glass. Then she placed the phone face down and smiled. Not out of cruelty, but clarity. "Brian calls. Where are you staying, by the way?" I told him the truth, just not the whole truth. Linda answered Brian's call without hesitation, letting her voice land soft and unbothered, the way a breeze lifts a sheer curtain, present but untraceable. "Oh, I booked something closer," she said simply, pouring herself a coffee in the kitchen as if this were just another Tuesday. "Didn't want to be driving 3 hours after the drive in." Her tone was neutral, friendly even, but she didn't volunteer details. She didn't need to. Every word she'd chosen was technically true. What she didn't say, what she kept folded neatly behind her breath, was that closer meant the main suite at the Ashby Heights Event Center, the same one Brian had been locked out of, the same room with vaulted ceilings, double balconies, and the garden terrace view where she would welcome each guest like the matriarch she had always been, but never been credited as. There was a pause on his end, long enough that she could hear the dry click of his jaw tightening. "Right," he said finally. "Well, if you hear anything about the double booking, let me know. I'm trying to figure out next steps." "I'm sure you will," she replied gently. Then she hung up. By noon, the family group chat lit up like a struck match. Brian had posted an update. Some last-minute changes with the venue, working on an alternate plan. Sit tight. The comment thread unraveled within seconds. Aunt Rachel. "Wait, what happened to the event center?" Cousin Danielle. "Does anyone know what's going on?" Uncle Ted. "We booked rooms months ago." Cousin Marcy. "Linda, any clue?" "Heard your name came up." Linda didn't panic. She didn't correct anyone. She waited until the noise hit its peak, then replied, slowly and deliberately, "I'll be hosting something as well. Come if you'd like. Details to follow." No defense, no drama. Just a door opened without being knocked on. By late afternoon, her dining table was covered in ivory cardstock and gold-tipped pens. Nancy, wearing reading glasses and her old PTA secretary determination, was triple-checking addresses against RSVP lists. They worked in silence, the kind women of their age and history share when something sacred is being built. She slid a stack of printed itineraries across the table. At the top, in embossed lettering, "Linda's Legacy Weekend, RSVP only." The schedule was elegant. Friday welcome wine on the terrace, Saturday brunch and memory gallery, Sunday closing toast under the oak trees. Nancy lifted an envelope and tapped it with a smirk. "Think he'll crash?" Linda shrugged, placing her tea beside a guest list with names highlighted in green. Every cousin, aunt, uncle, and sibling who'd ever thanked her for keeping the family glued. She handed the list to the venue coordinator the next morning and added a single line in cursive at the bottom, "Exclude Brian Martin and Amy Martin." Later that day, the event center's front office confirmed receipt. Their policy was clear: only listed guests admitted. No exceptions, especially not when full rental had been granted. It was a private booking now, Linda's booking. Outside her house, a breeze curled through the pine trees, lifting the corners of the doormat. Inside, her phone buzzed again. Not with texts this time, direct messages. Cousins who hadn't spoken to her since her retirement, nieces who had grown distant over the years. "I heard something's going on with the reunion. Brian's acting like everything's fine but won't say what happened. Are you really hosting something separate? Is it okay if we come?" Linda responded to each one the same way. "There's space for everyone who wants to be there." That night, as twilight bled into a burnt orange horizon, her phone lit up one more time. "Brian, our backup reunion spot. See you all at the Elk Ridge Recreation Hall." She stared at the message, a flicker of amusement touching her lips. A gymnasium, folding chairs, fluorescent lights, and her son, scrambling to hold together a story that was already unraveling. Brian sends a new group invite. "Our backup reunion spot. See you all at the Elk Ridge Rec Hall." He chose me last, so I gave everyone else a first-class weekend. The first thing to hit Brian was the smell, stale gym socks and industrial cleaner. It clung to the air inside the Elk Ridge Rec Hall like a memory no one wanted to revisit. The floors squeaked underfoot with every step, echoing through the cavernous, poorly lit room. The lights buzzed faintly overhead, flickering as if unsure whether to fully commit to being on. A folding table near the entrance held a stack of mismatched name tags and a half-empty box of powdered donuts. His wife, Amy, stood beside him, tight-lipped and squinting at her phone. "This isn't exactly what I pictured," she said, her voice low. Brian forced a smile, but the corners of his mouth didn't cooperate. "It's temporary. We'll make it work." Outside, the gravel parking lot baked under the afternoon sun. Guests trickled in slowly, visibly underwhelmed. Some wore confused expressions, others polite masks of enthusiasm that cracked around the eyes. A few peeled away with thin excuses about scheduling conflicts and prior commitments that hadn't existed until now. Inside, a Bluetooth speaker crackled from the corner, trying its best to fill the space with lukewarm 80s hits. Children kicked deflated balls across the floor, and adults leaned awkwardly against folded tables draped with plastic tablecloths. Meanwhile, 45 minutes away, champagne glasses clinked under shaded white canopies. Linda's garden terrace buzzed with low laughter and the soft shuffle of conversation. Plates of fruit tarts and lemon scones circulated on silver trays. A live string trio played a gentle version of "You Are the Sunshine of My Life." Nancy stood at the entrance with a clipboard, greeting each guest by name. Every cousin, aunt, and distant in-law who had grown up with Linda's homemade peach cobbler and late-night card games stepped through the arch of white roses and gasped. The lobby gallery, lined with decades of photographs and hand-labeled memory cards, drew hushed awe. Grandkids darted between the rows with juice boxes, pausing to look up at their younger selves frozen in old Polaroids. Inside the ballroom, a projector flickered to life. The first clip was grainy, a 1995 4th of July barbecue, but the voices were clear. Laughter, shouting, Linda in the background holding a plate in one hand and waving off the camera with the other. Guests watched and remembered. Back at the rec hall, Brian hovered near the bleachers, jaw clenched as he scrolled through phone. Photos were beginning to surface online, filtered, captioned, shared. Cousin Danielle had posted a slow-motion video of champagne being poured with the caption, "Legacy Weekend." Brian opened Instagram and saw 3 more posts tagged the same way. His stomach turned. "Hey," he called to his cousin Tyler, who had just arrived with his wife and kids. "Any chance you've got details for Linda's thing?" Tyler blinked. "Oh, I thought you already knew." Brian shook his head, trying to stay casual. "She said something vague. Didn't really explain." Tyler hesitated. "I mean, it's RSVP only. I wouldn't want to put you in a weird spot." Brian's smile tightened. "I'll figure it out." He opened his texts and pulled up his Aunt Ruth's name. "Hey, can you check if there's still room for us at Linda's?" The response came 5 minutes later. "Sorry, Brie. She's got a firm list. It's private." He didn't write back. Across town, Linda stood in the garden's shade, holding a glass of sparkling water in one hand, the afternoon sun catching the silver strands in her hair. She wore a pale blue linen dress, simple but striking. Around her, the energy of family pulsed gently, nothing frantic, nothing forced. She raised her glass and looked over the crowd. "To the ones who remember where they came from," she said, her voice strong but warm, "and to the ones who made sure we didn't forget." Applause followed, not loud, not rowdy, just deep, sustained respect. As the guests began to disperse toward the terrace, Linda stepped aside to answer a quiet knock at the front gate. She opened it to find Ethan standing there, her grandson, Brian's teenage son. His backpack hung off one shoulder. He looked nervous, but not uncertain. "Hi, Grandma," he said, voice low. "Is it okay if I come in?" Ethan, Brian's teenage son, shows up at Linda's door. He tried to split the family. His son crossed the line. For a full second, Linda said nothing. She simply studied Ethan's face. Freckled, flushed from the heat, hair a little too long over his ears, like Brian's used to be at that age. His backpack sagged over one shoulder, the strap twisted from a rushed exit. He looked up at her not like a boy sneaking out of trouble, but like someone seeking a place to land. "Dad's stressed," Ethan said quietly. "I didn't want to sit in a gym with folding chairs and microwaved pizza." Linda exhaled slowly, the breath passing through her chest like a door opening. She stepped back without a word and held the gate wide. Ethan stepped through. She didn't ask questions. Instead, she led him through the shaded stone pathway that opened into the main garden. The laughter of distant cousins spilled from the patio like music. A breeze lifted the linen tablecloths and carried the scent of citrus and peonies. She walked him to the front desk, gave his name to the concierge, and reached into her pocket for a room key card. "This is yours," she said, pressing it gently into his hand. "You can come and go as you please. No one needs to know anything you don't want them to." Ethan looked at the key, then at her. "Thanks, Grandma." She smiled and cupped the back of his head briefly before turning back toward the garden. She didn't look over her shoulder. She didn't need to. Inside, whispers had already started. By the appetizer table, someone leaned in. "Did I just see Brian's son walk in?" Near the drink station, another voice lowered. "Wait, so he's invited, but Brian's not?" Nancy passed by with a tray of lemon spritzers and caught the drift. "Some invitations are earned," she said without slowing down. Later, in the dining hall, Ethan appeared at the far end of the kids' table. He didn't speak much, just smiled occasionally and watched his younger cousins play with trivia cards and giggle over inside jokes. No one questioned his presence. Not after Linda stepped to the front of the room and offered a quiet welcome that mentioned no names, no exclusions, just a warm thank you to everyone who made the choice to be here. After dessert, Linda found a quiet moment to write in her leather-bound journal, the one she'd kept hidden beneath scarves in her bedroom drawer. Her handwriting, still firm, slid across the page. "A matriarch isn't granted. She's built. With memory. With silence. With patience nobody bothers to notice until the room needs anchoring." She closed the journal softly and placed it on her nightstand. Outside, the evening had turned dusky and golden. Guests lingered on the patio, sipping coffee and bourbon, their voices rising and falling in familiar waves. The ballroom glowed through the glass doors, string lights, polished silverware, warmth that moved like a tide through every interaction. Linda stood at the back entrance of the hall, watching the room from just beyond its frame. No announcements, no declarations, just the quiet pride of having built something no one could take credit for but her. Her phone buzzed from her pocket. She didn't rush to check it. When she did, the screen lit up with a single message, sharp and loud despite the lowercase. "Brian, where the hell are you?" Ethan gets a text from Brian. "Where the hell are you?" "He removed me from the agenda, so I removed him from the address." The gravel crackled under Brian's tires as he turned down the winding road toward Ashby Heights. Tree limbs arched overhead like indifferent sentinels, casting long shadows across his windshield. He had been driving without music, without conversation, without direction other than the one that had formed in his chest. Tight and hot and stubborn. Amy sat beside him, silent, scrolling her phone, jaw set. "You didn't tell me she had everyone," she finally muttered. "Rachel, Ted, the Sims cousins. Even my mom just texted me she's at the other one." "The other one, Brian." He gripped the wheel tighter. "I'm not going to argue with her. I just want to talk. She'll see reason once I'm there." But when they reached the gates of the event center, a young man in a navy polo stepped into the path of the car, raising his hand in a slow, practiced motion. His walkie-talkie buzzed at his hip. "Sorry, sir. Private event today. May I see your guest pass?" Brian lowered the window. "I'm Brian Martin. My family's inside. I need to speak to my mother." The attendant's tone didn't shift. "Your name's not on the list. Call someone. Call the front desk. Tell them I'm here." The attendant didn't move. "Sir, this is a full property buyout. We've been instructed not to admit anyone not on the guest list." Brian's laugh had no humor. "You're joking." But the gate didn't open. He pulled forward slightly, just enough to trigger the metal groan of the barrier's warning buzz. The attendant stepped closer. "Sir, I need you to reverse. Now." Brian stared ahead for a long second, jaw clenched so tight he thought something in his molars might crack. Then, finally, he reversed. Slowly, humiliated by every second of it. Back on the main road, parked under a patch of pine trees, Brian pulled out his phone and called Linda. Straight to voicemail. He hit record and raised the phone to his lips. "This is Petty," he said, his voice low but sharp. "And beneath you. You proved your point. Now can we please act like adults and talk?" He hit send. Linda was already seated near the front of the ballroom sipping a pale rosé when the voice message came through. She saw the notification light up her phone screen. She didn't hesitate. She tapped the message, raised the volume, and hit play, then set the phone gently on the table between her and Nancy. Brian's voice filled the space in clipped, bitter waves. "This is petty and beneath you." When the recording ended, Nancy arched an eyebrow. "Actually," she said, swirling her own glass slowly, "this is peak you." Linda didn't laugh, but her lips curved, softly, briefly. By early afternoon, the garden path was a steady stream of arrivals. Some guests hadn't RSVP'd at all. They'd heard about it from relatives or seen the photos online. One by one they came anyway, dressed too casually or too late, but all carrying something Linda had built: history, memory, quiet defiance. Inside the main hall, the room swelled with warmth. Napkins folded like roses, grandchildren chasing each other in soft-soled shoes, jazz playing low from the corner speakers. No mic needed, just voices that had known each other for decades and still had things left to say. Linda rose near the close of the meal, stepping to the front of the room with the calm, measured pace of someone not demanding attention, but receiving it anyway. She placed her glass lightly on the podium. "My husband once told me," she began, "that the only real power is in being remembered the right way. Not loudly, not through force, but through roots." The room fell silent. "I didn't ask for applause," she said. "I asked for presence. And you gave it to me." There was no hesitation. The room rose with her, not with wild cheering, but with steady, certain hands. A standing ovation that spoke of more than pride, it spoke of recognition. At that moment, Ethan, seated near the side wall, felt his phone buzz in his pocket. He looked down. "Brian, where the hell are you?" Brian calls Ethan again, this time furious. He raised his voice. I raised the bar. Ethan stepped out onto the porch, phone still warm in his palm, the screen glowing with his father's final text. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked out at the garden where his grandmother stood beneath a white linen canopy, laughing softly at something Aunt Rachel had said. The table next to them overflowed with fruit platters, pastries, champagne bottles sweating in silver buckets. Sunlight filtered through the trees and caught on the edges of the string quartet's instruments as they launched gently into a classic jazz standard. He turned and slipped through the side gate, walking the gravel path until the trees swallowed him from view. Brian was waiting in the SUV outside. The venue, engine idling, arms braced against the steering wheel. As Ethan approached, he rolled down the window. "Get in," Brian snapped. Ethan didn't move. "I came to talk, not sneak out." Brian's expression hardened. "So you are at her thing?" "I told you I didn't want to sit in a gym for 2 days," Ethan replied, "and you didn't tell me she was hosting something. You let me think she bailed." Brian stepped out of the car and came around the front. His voice dropped, not in volume, but in temperature. "She's twisting everything, turning people against me. This was my reunion to run, and she hijacked it." Ethan didn't flinch. "No one made me leave, Dad. I chose to be with her." Brian shook his head, a bitter laugh caught in his throat. "You think this is some noble legacy play? She's being manipulative, calculated. She's using you." "You mean like the way you used her address list and her old contacts and claimed it was your idea to start hosting 10 years ago?" Ethan said. "Half the people at your picnic didn't even stay past lunch." Brian opened his mouth, but nothing came out. His son's words landed too fast to counter, too steady to deny. "You've spent years pushing her to the edge," Ethan said, voice quiet now. "She just finally stopped letting it happen." He turned and walked back through the trees, the weight of the conversation trailing behind him like smoke. Back inside the garden, Linda served coffee to the older guests and waved off offers to help clean up. The morning had stretched beautifully: lavender scones, smoked salmon bites, a berry tart that tasted like it had stolen sweetness from another century. No speeches today, no announcements. Just families scattered across linen picnic blankets and wicker chairs, soaking in the sun, music, and memory. A few guests scrolled through their phones and set them down quickly, whispering about Brian's second-day picnic getting canceled. Low turnout, Someone murmured behind the lemonade table. Cousins bailed. Words out. Linda heard the murmurs, but she didn't respond. She simply carried a tray of fresh lavender sprigs to the brunch tables, smiling at each guest as though nothing had shifted, though everything had. By midday, guests had started calling her event the real reunion. Nancy leaned in as she passed. You didn't just raise the bar, you became it. Linda just smiled, her eyes fixed on Ethan across the garden as he returned and picked up a drink. Later, as guests wandered the gallery or rested in the shade, Ethan found her seated beneath a pergola, flipping gently through the guest book. He sat beside her, elbows on knees. Was this your plan all along? He asked. Linda didn't answer at first. She reached into her bag and pulled out a slim black notebook, leather-wrapped and worn smooth at the corners. She opened it slowly to a page near the back. Neatly printed in her unmistakable handwriting were the words, Reunion Schedule, Take Back the Name. Linda opens her notebook to reveal, Reunion Schedule, Take Back the Name. They thought he organized this family. They forgot who actually did. The framed copy of the first reunion flyer arrived in an unmarked manila envelope, slipped under Linda's suite door as quietly as a confession. No note, no signature, just the yellowed paper, creased down the middle, preserved like it had been waiting for the right moment to be seen again. Across the top, in bold serif type, it read, Martin Family Summer Gathering, July 1998, and beneath that, in faded blue ink, hosted by Linda Martin, RSVP by mail or call after 5 p.m. Linda held the paper gently between her fingers, staring at her own handwriting. Her cursive was firm, tidy, a little loopier than it had become with age. She remembered printing the copies at the high school where she taught, sneaking into the English department office early one morning before anyone else arrived. It had been her idea from the beginning. A simple picnic, a few lawn chairs, a rented tent, and a handwritten sign. She had bought the lemonade powder in bulk and spent the night before slicing watermelon with Tom in the kitchen until the fruit stained their forearms pink. She could still smell the mix of charcoal and sunscreen, hear the plastic folding tables being unfolded by cousins who hadn't seen each other in years. She'd done it again the next year, and the one after that. For 15 straight summers, she had booked venues, juggled RSVPs, printed itineraries, and mailed invitations from the dining table Brian now used to store unopened mail. The slow erasure hadn't come all at once. It had arrived disguised as help. Brian offering to handle logistics, suggesting she take a break and let the younger generation step in. Then somehow her name disappeared from the emails, then the photos, then the schedule entirely. Linda walked the envelope down to the front office and handed it to the woman at the welcome desk. Would you mind posting this on the community board? In the main lobby? She asked. The woman smiled as she read the heading. Wow, from 98? You look exactly the same. Linda gave a small, grateful nod. Thank you. I'd just like the family to see where it started. By noon, the reunion was in full bloom. The brunch buffet shimmered under glass domes. Guests wandered between the photo gallery and the open garden, laughter trailing behind them like perfume. In the lobby, the old flyer hung dead center on the corkboard, pinned between current event schedules and a map of Ashby Heights. At first, it was only one guest who noticed, then 3, then a dozen. By mid-afternoon, clusters of relatives had paused beneath the flyer, reading it slowly. One by one, they connected the dots, the dates, the names, the handwriting. Murmured conversations turned thoughtful, brows furrowed, faces changed. She started it, someone whispered. She did all of this for years. Why didn't we know? The recognition didn't arrive like applause. It arrived like the tide. Quiet, consistent, undeniable. Linda sat beneath a shade umbrella, sipping iced tea, watching the awareness spread with the same steadiness she had used to build the thing itself. She didn't interrupt, didn't point. Just sat, hands folded in her lap, as the legacy she had always known quietly shifted back into her name. Ethan came over, holding a plate of honeycomb and sharp cheddar. People are talking about the flyer, he said. I know. You want me to say something? Set the record straight? Linda shook her head. Number the truth doesn't need a microphone, just an open wall. Later that afternoon, as guests gathered near the garden fountain for a final group photo, a distant relative Linda barely knew, a second cousin's granddaughter maybe, lingered behind. She looked at Linda with wide, earnest eyes. "Next year, you're doing this again, right?" Linda didn't answer immediately. She just smiled, lifted her camera, and snapped the moment in silence. A distant relative says, "Next year, you're doing this again, right?" He trademarked a name. I embodied it. The letter came on a Wednesday, certified, stamped, and delivered with the mechanical precision of a threat dressed as a formality. Linda opened it at her kitchen table, slicing carefully through the envelope with a butter knife. The contents were printed on thick, off-white paper, the kind used by people who believe weight equals authority. At the top, intent to trademark filing, Martin Family Reunion, filed by Brian T. Martin. The room stayed quiet. Just the rhythmic hum of the refrigerator and the muted chirp of birds outside her open kitchen window. She read the letter twice, then a third time. Nowhere in the document did it mention her, not as founder, not as organizer, not even as a participant. He hadn't sent a text, hadn't called, just filed paperwork. Linda folded the letter neatly and placed it back in the envelope. She didn't curse, she didn't cry. She opened her laptop instead and typed a quick message to her attorney, a woman she'd taught English with years ago before law school lured her away. Subject line: need a quick cease and desist body, family name, family reunion, no ownership, just ego. Fix it, please. By Friday, the response was mailed back to Brian's attorney, formal, polite, and sharp enough to draw blood without breaking the skin. Family names and informally organized events cannot be trademarked. Linda didn't post about the letter. She didn't need to. Instead, she uploaded a new digital album to the family's shared photo cloud. Title: Original Host, Original Heart. Cover photo: her standing in front of the first reunion banner from 1998, holding a baby Brian on her hip and a clipboard in her hand. Within the hour, cousins started resharing it. Old friends added comments. Even Nancy texted a simple, "You posted that with surgical precision." Later that afternoon, in a tight corner of a park in town, Brian confronted Ethan by the basketball court. No greeting, no small talk. "You're choosing sides," he said flatly, eyes hard, jaw set. Ethan, who had grown 2 inches that summer and suddenly understood the value of choosing his words, didn't flinch. "I'm choosing legacy," he said, "and I'm not sure yours is the one I want to inherit." Brian stared at his son for a long moment. Then he turned and walked back toward the car without a word. Linda never heard about the exchange firsthand. She didn't ask. She didn't need to. That evening, Ethan appeared in the backyard with a folding chair and sat beside her in silence. They didn't speak for 20 minutes, just listened to the breeze shift the leaves above them. The next day, she gathered 3 generations, her sister, her daughter-in-law's mother, her granddaughter, and took a photo in front of the community board at Ashby Heights, the same board where her original flyer still hung, now laminated and double-pinned by staff who had quietly fallen in love with the quiet drama of it all. She posted to the Cloud album with a caption that didn't shout but rang like a bell, "Kept together, not pushed away." 3 hours later, a new email appeared in her inbox from amy.martin@rosehillinteriors.com, subject: "So you win." Body: "But what now?" Linda stared at the message for a long time, then she closed the laptop, got up, and poured herself a glass of water. She didn't reply. Not yet. Brian's wife emails Linda, "You win. But what now?" They waited for a response. I sent silence. Linda stared at the screen for 10 seconds, then 15. The subject line was still sitting there in her inbox, bold and unread. "So you win. But what now?" Amy's name beside it, the timestamp fresh, like the email had arrived not just from her computer, but from a place of reluctant surrender. Linda didn't open it. She didn't need to. There were messages that asked for dialogue, and others that simply confirmed what had already been lost. Instead, she closed the laptop, stood up from the desk, and walked to the hall closet. From the shelf above the board games and backup candles, she pulled down a heavy canvas pouch filled with embossed stationery, the kind you buy in bulk, not for events but for remembering how to slow down. She brewed a cup of Earl Grey, opened the windows to let the breeze roll through, and began writing. One note at a time. Dear Marcy, thank you for sitting next to Aunt Rachel when she got overwhelmed. She told me later it meant more than you knew. Dear Darren, you said my lemon bars tasted like 1997. That's the highest compliment I've ever received. Dear Elaine, I saw you wiping your eyes during the home video montage. So was I. The stack of envelopes grew in neat piles by state, then by city. By the time the sun reached the edge of her living room carpet, she had addressed 34 letters. By evening, 47. She wrote until her wrist ached and her fingers smudged the ink. She didn't post anything, didn't reply to Amy. Her silence now wasn't punishment, it was peace. She had said everything already, in hugs, in laughter, in a perfectly timed brunch that didn't require permission to be historic. The following day, texts flooded her phone. Cousin Pete. Best one yet, hands down. Aunt Gloria. Let me know the second you set next year's date. Neighbor's daughter, who wasn't even invited. Is it true there was a string quartet at brunch? Linda didn't reply to all of them, but she read every single one, smiling like someone watching old tapes of themselves from a better angle than they remembered. Ethan stopped by the afternoon before he left for camp. His duffel bag looked heavier than usual, and he seemed taller again. How that was even possible, she wasn't sure. He gave her a hug, tighter than she expected. Let me know when to help next year, okay? She looked up at him, at this boy who had chosen her not out of pity or rebellion, but because he saw something worth preserving. Maybe we do it in Savannah next time, she said with a small, sly smile. Change the backdrop, keep the spirit. Ethan grinned. You'd make Savannah famous. She watched him disappear down the driveway, backpack bouncing once with each step. The quiet that followed wasn't lonely. It was full, like a room that had just been applauded. Across town, Brian stood in a city park beneath a thinning maple tree, arms crossed, sunglasses hiding most of his face. A folding table beside him held store-bought cupcakes and a sweating tub of lemonade. Only 11 people had shown up, and 2 of them left before lunch. No playlist, no laughter, just the sound of wind blowing through unclaimed name tags. He checked Instagram. Every post he saw bore the same tag, number Linda Legacy Weekend. Pictures of cousins smiling under canopies, the banner hanging proudly behind them. A boomerang of the champagne toast. A slow pan across the garden as the string quartet played Moon River. He scrolled without expression, but his hand trembled just slightly on the screen. At home, Linda returned from her walk just as the mail truck pulled away from the curb. She opened the box, pulling out a few catalogs, 2 bills, and 1 envelope, cream-colored and square, with Brian's name scrawled in firm, almost too careful handwriting. No return address. No visible sarcasm. She held it there for a long moment, standing in the sunlight, reading her name on the front. Linda opens her mailbox. A formal apology letter, from Brian. He wrote it down, but it still wasn't enough. The envelope was heavier than it looked. Linda stood in her foyer with the door still half open, the summer breeze tugging at the hem of her cardigan, her thumb resting against the sealed flap like it might reveal the tone inside before she even opened it. She walked to the dining table, pulled out the same silver letter opener she'd used on wedding invitations and condolence cards, and sliced it open with one smooth stroke. The letter was handwritten, Brian's, unmistakably. Sharp, squared off, script, like he was trying to prove he had control over every word. No greeting, no dear mom, just the weight of a middle paragraph where the opening should have been. I see now that things could have gone differently. There was never any intent to exclude you. Sometimes we move too fast and forget who held the map. I never meant to hurt you. That was the line that landed last, as if it was meant to echo longer than the rest. Linda read it once, then again. Nowhere in the letter did he say he was wrong. Nowhere did he acknowledge the choices, not oversights, that had stretched years. She folded the letter quietly, pressed it in half again, and then tore it down the middle, a clean, deliberate tear. One half dropped into the small trash bin under the sink. The other, the bottom half with the last line, she kept. Later that night, seated in her upstairs den beneath the warm halo of the reading lamp, Linda opened her scrapbook. A wide, leather-bound journal with worn edges and tissue separators. She turned past photographs of the garden brunch, past the family trivia night, past the entry labeled Legacy Weekend Guest List. Final. She pressed the torn paper into the next blank page. Beneath it, she wrote in her steadier, looping script, "He meant to forget me." I remembered myself. The next morning, she opened her laptop and began typing. Not a letter this time, but fiction, or close to it. The story centered around a retired music teacher named Helen who hosted an accidental revolution disguised as a family cookout. The characters were exaggerated, names changed, details blurred, but the feeling was clear. A woman reclaiming not just space, but voice. She submitted it to the Palmetto Quarterly, a small but respected Southern lifestyle magazine that featured short stories, essays, and reflections in their annual family issue. 3 weeks later, she received an email titled, "We loved this." They planned to run it in print. Her phone didn't stop ringing that week. 3 local women's groups called, retired teachers' guilds, small-town heritage circles, even the library's memoir club. They all asked the same thing. Would you speak? She agreed to one. Just one. The event took place in the church basement where she'd once taught Sunday school. Folding chairs again, but this time the space was full, the lights soft, the hush electric. She stood at the podium in a blue blouse and soft gray slacks and titled her talk simply, "When Matriarchs Go Quiet." She spoke without notes, about invisible work, about the erasure that happens slowly, about how some women are made to feel like background noise until the room needs music. They gave her a standing ovation, quiet, steady, proud. Back at home, just after sunset, Linda returned to the porch with a cup of mint tea and a blanket draped across her lap. She leaned back into the silence of the evening, no music playing, no TV echoing from inside. Her phone buzzed. She lifted it, thumb hovering before she tapped to answer. "Hi," said a cheerful voice on the line. "This is Melissa from Ashby Heights Event Center. Just calling to check. Any interest in reserving for next year?" Linda didn't speak right away. The breeze rustled the pages of the notebook beside her. Somewhere inside it, the next story was already forming. The event center calls, "Want to reserve for next year?" I didn't just book a venue, I rewrote the family story. The phone call wasn't long, but its impact stretched far beyond the minutes it took to complete. Linda sat at her breakfast table, morning light washing over the pages of her planner, when the cheerful voice of Melissa from Ashby Heights came through the line. Her tone was warm, but purposeful, like someone who understood exactly what this call represented. Not a routine follow-up, but something closer to recognition. "We wanted to offer you what we call our legacy host rate," Melissa explained, tapping keys in the background. "It's a lifetime discount we reserve for organizers who've made a sustained impact on the community or event history at Ashby Heights. Priority weekends, concierge scheduling, first pick of rooms. We'd love to have you back." Linda didn't rush to answer. She traced her finger along the edge of her planner, pausing where she had left the previous year's date circled and underlined in green. After everything, she thought, after being pushed aside, rewritten, repackaged, here she was, not only being invited back but given the keys to the space she had once been locked out of. "I'd like to book the second weekend in June," she said, her voice as calm and grounded as ever. "Same setup. Ballroom, garden, full suite access." "Of course," Melissa replied. "Would you like to add any notes or clauses to your booking this time?" "Yes," Linda said, glancing at the line she'd jotted down on a sticky note that now seemed prophetic in its timing. "Please include organizer's discretion, guest list final, no substitutions." Melissa paused, then replied with professional composure, "Understood. We'll include that in the final contract." As she ended the call, Linda didn't smile in triumph. What she felt was steadier, quieter than victory. something that lived beneath the skin of satisfaction, in the marrow of self-respect. She picked up her pen, turned to a fresh page in her planner, and began noting details. Later that afternoon, Brian called. She let it ring the first time, then the second, and finally answered on the third. Her voice, when she spoke, carried no trace of hesitation. "Hi, Mom," Brian began, the awkward edge of someone feeling the balance shift beneath him. I heard from Ethan that you're already planning next year's reunion." Linda didn't respond immediately. She stood near the living room window, watching a pair of sparrows flutter around the feeder she had refilled that morning. When she did speak, her tone was even. "I am." Brian cleared his throat. "I was wondering if maybe we could talk about, I don't know, doing it together this time. Start fresh. Rebuild." Linda's eyes remained fixed on the glass, on the birds that moved with purpose and instinct. She let the silence stretch, not as punishment, but as space for truth. "You didn't forget me, Brian. You buried me," she said, the words quiet but unmistakably final. "You called it streamlining. You called it efficiency, but it was erasure, dressed up." "I didn't mean to hurt." She cut him off gently. "Please stop saying that. Meaning doesn't change outcome." There was a pause on the line. She heard him exhale, like someone finally releasing the version of the story they'd been clinging to. "I'd welcome your help," she continued, "but not as lead. If you want to contribute, we always need volunteers for setup, water stations, cleanup." His silence now was different, not angry, not wounded, just aware. "I'll think about it," he said. "You should." That evening, with the sky bleeding into pink across the horizon, Linda opened her planner once again and turned to next June. She pressed the pen into the paper with measured grace, writing, "Next reunion. My name. My rules." Below it, she underlined the weekend. Twice. Before bed, she sat at her desk and opened her laptop. She selected a photograph, taken just after the final brunch, when the ballroom had emptied. The chairs were tucked in. The linen tablecloths folded. Sunlight stretched long across the polished floor. A moment of quiet, not as absence, but as ownership. She uploaded the photo and typed 2 words below it: "Save the date." She hit post, closed the laptop, and turned off the lamp. Linda posts the first teaser image. Empty ballroom, captioned, "Save the date." "They wore my name, then tried to unwear me." The tags arrived in a satin-lined box, stacked with surgical precision, each one sealed in a soft plastic sleeve. Linda lifted the top card slowly, the light catching the gold foil lettering that shimmered against ivory cardstock. Martin Family Reunion, established 1998, hosted by Linda Martin. Below that, a blank line for each guest's name, followed by a delicate branch motif printed in charcoal gray. They were subtle, elegant, weighty in the hand, not mass-produced stickers or lanyards, not forgettable. These were designed to be kept. She ran her thumb across the embossed founding year, remembering how Brian had once tried to trademark the name as if he'd forged it himself. Now the truth was printed on every chest, shoulder level, impossible to overlook. On the same afternoon, the banner arrived. It was nearly 12 feet wide, a stretch of deep navy canvas with cream-colored letters bold enough to read from the end of the street, celebrating 26 years of family. Still counting. Linda oversaw its installation with her arms crossed and eyes sharp. 2 staffers hoisted it onto the event center's brick entry wall, tightening the cord fasteners, then stepping back for her approval. "It's not just a number," she said to no one in particular. "It's continuity." The next evening, Ethan came by, a stack of books under one arm and a duffel bag swinging from the other. He dropped it by the couch and flopped down like someone who had grown 3 inches in both height and confidence. "I was thinking," he said, stretching his legs, "next year, maybe I help more." Linda turned from the kitchen, one eyebrow raised. "Help how?" "Not just set up chairs, like actually co-host." She studied him for a moment, trying to read beneath the enthusiasm for what was real. He held her gaze, unflinching. "Only if you're ready to treat the past like a blueprint, not a footnote," she said. "I am," he replied. On your terms. She nodded once. Then we start with a checklist. And a budget. He grinned. When the new round of invitations went out, they were clean and spare. No gilded language, no guilt. Just the essential details, date, place, and a line that read, hosted by Linda Martin, with co-host Ethan Martin, RSVP optional but appreciated. All are welcome, including Brian. No emotional qualifiers, no performative olive branch, just a line on the list and an open box beside it. Linda didn't wait for a response. Instead, she turned her attention to the growing number of inquiries trickling into her inbox, some from cousins, others from neighbors, even 2 from women she hadn't spoken to since PTA days. All of them asked versions of the same thing. Could you help us organize something like this? We've lost our structure. How do we start over? Would you be willing to meet? At first, she responded with simple tips, venue suggestions, budget templates. Then a cousin in Indiana offered to pay for a consulting call. Then 2 more offered after her magazine story circled through community newsletters. And just like that, she began sketching out the bones of something new. The Reunion Project. She bought the domain name, filed a small business application, drafted a logo in blue and gold, a circle of chairs beneath a single oak tree. One evening, as the wind swept through the blooming hydrangeas outside her den, she refreshed her guest list spreadsheet, checking names off as RSVPs trickled in. New ones, old ones, surprising ones, and then his, Brian Martin, RSVP, yes. She blinked once, looked again. There it was, quiet, unadorned, just yes. Brian's name appears on the guest list, RSVP, yes. They forgot whose house they were in. I had the deed the whole time. The morning sun draped across Ashby Heights like a well-ironed linen napkin, quiet, crisp, ceremonial. Linda arrived just after 7, hours before the first guests would walk through the front arch of blooming white hydrangeas. She wore a pale gray blouse, linen trousers, and a pair of low-heeled shoes she'd broken in years ago but saved for days that carried weight. This one did. The banner was already strung across the entrance, celebrating 26 years of family. Still counting. Fluttering lightly in the breeze, its message now undeniable. At the registration table, the name tags gleamed in even rows. She double-checked each one, stopping briefly when her hand hovered above the last, Brian Martin, guest. She didn't remove it. She didn't hesitate. Instead, she tucked it neatly into the final slot and walked the perimeter of the courtyard, mentally rehearsing each transition, the music cue, the brunch layout, the photo station timing. Everything in its place. Everything in her control. By 10, guests were trickling in, some in sundresses and seersucker, others in polos and denim. Children tugged at their parents' hands, eager to be the first at the pastry table. A few guests paused to take photos under the banner. Others went straight to the mimosa bar, chatting in soft tones that grew louder with familiarity. Linda stood at the entrance, palms folded lightly in front of her, welcoming each group with a nod, a smile, and a warmth that didn't beg for acknowledgement. It commanded it. Just after 11, a shadow moved across the stone path. She looked up. Brian. He wore a short-sleeved button-down, too formal for the heat and too casual for contrition, his posture slightly hunched, shoulders narrowed inward. Amy wasn't with him. He moved slowly, as if the act of crossing the threshold was not logistical, but spiritual. When he reached the table, he didn't speak immediately. His eyes scanned the crowd briefly. Cousins he hadn't called, relatives he'd assumed had taken his side. They didn't look away, but they didn't wave either. Then he turned to Linda. "I was wrong," he said, voice barely above the hum of conversation behind them. "Not just once, over years. I didn't see what I erased until you rebuilt it without me." She studied him for a long moment, as if listening to something beneath the words. "I accept the apology," she said, "but not the rewrite." He nodded, understanding more in her restraint than he would have in any speech. She reached into the tray and pulled out his name tag. "Guest," she said, handing it to him with a small smile. "Wear it proudly." He took it, clipped it to his shirt pocket. Didn't ask for anything else. Inside, the ballroom filled again. Laughter curling up toward the chandeliers, the scent of honey-glazed ham and rosemary biscuits wafting from the buffet. The string quartet played something slow and elegant as Ethan moved through the space, checking setups, smiling in short bursts that mirrored Linda's in their reserve. She waited until everyone was seated, until plates were filled and drinks poured. Then she rose, glass in hand, and stepped to the center of the room. The hush came gradually, like water receding. "I won't keep you long," she said, her voice amplified not by a mic, but by memory. "But I would like to toast the ones who've kept this family stitched together through seasons, through silences, through shifts none of us expected." She paused, looked around. "And to the ones who remember where we came from, and the ones who finally learned to look back." There were no roaring cheers, just raised glasses, clinking gently like wind chimes in unity. Ethan pulled out his phone and snapped a single photo, Linda at the center, guests turned toward her, the banner behind her stretching across the wall. He uploaded it later that evening with a single caption, "The original organizer." In the background of the image, just above her shoulder, a quote stitched onto the fabric of the banner shimmered in the light. "Let them underestimate you. Because when they do, the surprise is always yours to give."